I left home with $100, returned with $100 million, but my family still didn't learn the lesson. The sun was setting behind the cracked window of our small apartment when I made my decision. The faint smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, a reminder of breakfast that never quite came together properly. I stood there, staring at my reflection in the grimy glass, clutching the crumpled $100 bill in my hand. It wasn't much, just enough to buy a bus ticket and maybe some food along the way, but it represented everything I had left. That night, as my family argued over who forgot to pay the electricity bill, I slipped out quietly, leaving behind not just a home but years of expectations that had become chains around my spirit. Growing up in our house felt like living under a storm cloud that refused to move on. My parents were hard-working people, yet they carried an invisible weight, a belief that life owed them something for all their struggles. They worked tirelessly, yet somehow always found ways to blame others for their misfortunes. If only we'd been given better opportunities, my mother would say with a sigh, while my father muttered about how the world conspired against honest men. Their bitterness seeped into every conversation, every decision, and eventually into me. From a young age, I learned to tiptoe around their disappointment. Success wasn't celebrated, instead, it was met with skepticism. When I brought home straight A's, my mother frowned and said, "Well, schoolwork is easy compared to real life." If I saved up money from odd jobs, my father shook his head and muttered, "You think a few dollars will change anything?" Their words weren't meant to hurt, they came from a place of love, or so I told myself, but they planted seeds of doubt deep within me. Still, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that there was more to life than what they believed. So when I left that evening, I didn't leave because I hated them. I left because I loved myself too much to stay trapped in their narrative of perpetual struggle. I wanted to prove to them, to myself, that success wasn't just reserved for the lucky few. It could be earned through grit, determination, and a refusal to accept limitations imposed by fear. The first months away were brutal. I took whatever work I could find, washing dishes in greasy diners, cleaning motel rooms where the stench of stale cigarettes clung to the walls, even picking fruit under the scorching sun until my hands blistered. Nights were spent sleeping on park benches or curled up in 24-hour laundromats, listening to the hum of machines as I tried to drown out thoughts of home. There were moments when I almost gave up, when the loneliness threatened to swallow me whole. But each time, I reminded myself why I had left. This wasn't just about survival, it was about proving a point. One day, while working at a diner in a bustling city, I overheard two businessmen talking about investments. They spoke excitedly about stocks, real estate, and venture capital, using terms I didn't understand but desperately wanted to learn. Something inside me clicked. Those men weren't born rich, they had knowledge, strategy, and confidence. And if they could do it, why couldn't I? That realization became my turning point. I began devouring books on finance during breaks, scribbling notes on napkins and scraps of paper. I watched YouTube videos late into the night, studying interviews with entrepreneurs who had started with nothing. Slowly, painstakingly, I pieced together a plan. I saved every penny I earned, reinvesting it into low-risk ventures recommended by mentors I sought out online. At first, progress was slow, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, but then like a snowball rolling downhill, momentum built. My breakthrough came unexpectedly. A chance encounter with an investor at a networking event led to a partnership that changed everything. He saw potential in me, not just as someone hungry for success, but as someone willing to put in the work. Together, we launched a tech startup aimed at solving everyday problems through innovative software solutions. It was risky, exhausting, and often terrifying, but it also ignited a fire in me I hadn't known existed. For the first time, I felt truly alive. As the company grew, so did my bank account. What started as modest profits turned into millions, then tens of millions. The media dubbed me a self-made millionaire, though I preferred to call myself a survivor. Surviving not just poverty but the toxic mindset that kept so many tethered to mediocrity. I bought a sleek penthouse overlooking the city skyline, drove luxury cars, and attended galas where champagne flowed freely. Yet despite all the trappings of wealth, I remained grounded. Money hadn't changed me, it had freed me. When I finally returned home after nearly a decade, I expected fireworks. Surely, seeing their daughter transformed from a penniless runaway into a multimillionaire would spark awe, pride, even gratitude. Instead, I walked into the same dimly lit apartment, now cluttered with faded furniture and unpaid bills scattered across the table. My mother barely looked up from her knitting. "Oh, you're back," she said flatly, as if I'd simply gone out for groceries. My father grunted from his recliner, eyes glued to the television. It was surreal. Here I was, standing before them with proof that dreams could come true, and they acted as though nothing remarkable had happened. No questions about how I did it, no curiosity about my journey. Just indifference wrapped in thinly veiled resentment. Over dinner, a lukewarm casserole reheated 3 times, I cautiously shared snippets of my story. I talked about the challenges, the sacrifices, the victories. I thought maybe hearing about my struggles would resonate with them, show them that perseverance pays off. Instead, my father scoffed. "Luck," he muttered between bites. "That's all it is. You got lucky." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "And look at you now, flaunting your fancy clothes and big city manners. Do you think this changes anything? Life's still hard for the rest of us." Their words hit like a punch to the gut. How could they dismiss everything I'd achieved so easily? Didn't they see the irony in their own attitudes? Here they were, complaining about missed opportunities, yet refusing to acknowledge the one sitting right in front of them. Their inability to recognize effort and resilience infuriated me, but beneath the anger lay sadness. Sadness that no amount of wealth could bridge the gap between us. Over the following weeks, I tried to help. I paid off their debts, renovated the apartment, even set up college funds for my younger siblings. Each gesture was met with reluctance, as if accepting my generosity meant admitting they were wrong. My mother accused me of showing off, while my father muttered about how charity breeds laziness. Their ingratitude stung, but what hurt most was realizing they hadn't changed. Despite witnessing firsthand what determination could achieve, they clung stubbornly to their victim mentality. One evening, after another fruitless attempt to connect, I found myself walking alone through the neighborhood where I grew up. The streets were eerily familiar yet foreign, lined with memories both painful and poignant. I passed the corner store where I used to dream of buying candy without counting coins, the playground where I once imagined escaping to faraway lands. As I wandered, I noticed a group of kids playing basketball under flickering streetlights. Their laughter echoed through the night, untainted by cynicism or despair. Watching them, I realized something profound. Breaking free from negativity isn't just about achieving success, it's about choosing joy over bitterness, hope over resignation. My family's inability to embrace change stemmed not from lack of opportunity, but from fear. Fear of failure, fear of vulnerability, fear of believing they deserved better. And perhaps that's why they couldn't celebrate my accomplishments, not because they didn't care, but because doing so would force them to confront their own limitations. But I wasn't ready to give up on them. Not yet. The realization that my family's resistance wasn't personal, but rather a reflection of their own fears gave me a strange sense of clarity. It didn't erase the frustration or hurt, but it softened the edges enough for me to see them as flawed humans instead of adversaries. I began approaching our interactions differently, not with grand gestures or attempts to fix their lives, but with small deliberate acts of kindness and patience. I started spending more time with my younger siblings, who were still impressionable and hungry for guidance. While my parents remained entrenched in their worldview, there was a flicker of curiosity in my brother Sam's eyes when he asked about how I learned to invest. And my sister Lily, only 12 years old, listened intently as I told her stories of resilience and risk-taking. They weren't dismissive like my parents. They were eager to dream, to imagine possibilities beyond the narrow confines of our neighborhood. One Saturday afternoon, I took Sam and Lily to the park where I used to play as a child. We sat on a weathered bench overlooking the basketball court, watching the same group of kids I'd seen before. Their shouts and laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the heaviness that often lingered in our home. I turned to Sam and said, "You know, life doesn't have to be this constant uphill battle. You can create your own path if you're willing to work for it." Sam frowned, his brow furrowing as he processed my words. "But what if we fail?" he asked quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "What if we try really hard and it's not enough?" His question struck a chord deep within me. I remembered asking myself the same thing countless times during those early days away from home. Failure had been my greatest fear too, a looming specter that threatened to confirm all the doubts planted by my parents. But now, looking back, I realized failure hadn't broken me. In fact, it had shaped me, teaching lessons no amount of success could replicate. I leaned closer to him, meeting his gaze. "Failure isn't the end," I said firmly. It's just part of the journey. The important thing is to keep going, even when it feels impossible. Trust me, Sam, the world rewards people who refuse to give up. Lily chimed in then, her wide eyes alight with wonder. So, you think we could do something big someday? Like you did? Her innocence pierced through the weight of everything I'd experienced. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe in the simplicity of her question, the pure, unfiltered hope that hadn't yet been tainted by cynicism. I smiled at her, ruffling her hair affectionately. Absolutely. But here's the secret, it starts with believing in yourself. No one else can do that for you. As the weeks went by, I poured my energy into nurturing their dreams while continuing to navigate the complexities of my relationship with my parents. My mother, though resistant, occasionally let slip hints of pride buried beneath layers of criticism. Once, after I helped her set up an online store to sell handmade crafts, she muttered under her breath, "Well, I suppose it's nice to have some extra money coming in." It wasn't much, but it was progress, a crack in the armor of her skepticism. My father, however, remained the hardest to reach. His stubbornness was a fortress, impenetrable and immovable. Yet even he couldn't entirely ignore the changes happening around him. One evening, as we sat together in silence, he glanced at the stack of financial magazines I'd left on the coffee table. "All this business stuff," he began gruffly, "it's complicated. How do you even understand it?" For the first time, I saw vulnerability in his eyes, not outright admiration, but a glimmer of curiosity. Seizing the opportunity, I explained basic concepts of investing and entrepreneurship, using examples from my own experiences. He listened, albeit reluctantly, and though he didn't admit it, I could tell he was intrigued. Perhaps, I thought, there was still a chance to plant a seed in him too. Despite these small victories, the tension between us never fully dissipated. There were moments when my patience wore thin, when their ingratitude felt like a betrayal of everything I'd worked for. During one particularly heated argument, my mother snapped, "Why do you always have to make such a fuss about your achievements? Not everyone needs to be rich to live a good life." Her words stung, but they also forced me to confront a difficult truth. My success wasn't just about proving a point, it was about healing wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged. Deep down, I craved validation from the very people who had once dismissed my potential. I wanted them to say, "We were wrong. You showed us what's possible." But expecting that kind of acknowledgement was perhaps unrealistic. Some scars run too deep to heal overnight. And yet, amidst the chaos, there were moments of unexpected beauty. One rainy afternoon, as I sorted through old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a dusty photo album. Flipping through its pages, I found faded pictures of happier times, birthday parties, family vacations, quiet evenings spent laughing over dinner. These images reminded me of a truth I sometimes forgot. Despite their flaws, my parents had loved me in their own imperfect way. Their bitterness wasn't born out of malice but out of pain, frustration, and a lifetime of unmet expectations. Tears blurred my vision as I traced the edges of a photograph showing my father holding me as a toddler. Back then, he had dreamed big for me, just as he had for himself. Somewhere along the way, those dreams had been crushed by reality, leaving behind only fragments of what might have been. Seeing that photo reignited a spark of compassion within me. Maybe my journey wasn't just about escaping their limitations, it was about helping them rediscover the dreams they had lost. With renewed determination, I decided to tackle the root of the problem, their mindset. I began sharing stories of other self-made individuals who had overcome adversity, emphasizing not just their successes but the struggles that preceded them. I introduced them to documentaries and podcasts featuring entrepreneurs who had faced rejection, poverty, and failure yet persevered. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their attitudes began to shift. One night, after watching a documentary about a woman who built a global empire from scratch, my father leaned back in his chair and sighed. "She's tough," he admitted grudgingly. "I guess some people just don't take no for an answer." It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was a start. Encouraged by this tiny breakthrough, I continued planting seeds of possibility, hoping they would eventually take root. Meanwhile, Sam and Lily flourished under my guidance, their confidence growing with each passing day. Sam started tinkering with coding, creating simple apps in his spare time, while Lily wrote stories that brimmed with imagination and ambition. Watching them embrace their potential filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't anticipated. But just as things seemed to be improving, an unexpected challenge arose, one that tested not only my resolve but the fragile bonds I had worked so hard to rebuild. A distant relative fell ill, leaving behind a mountain of medical bills and a family struggling to cope. The situation hit close to home, stirring memories of the financial instability that had haunted my childhood. When my parents announced they planned to sell the house to help cover the costs, I knew I had to intervene. "This isn't your responsibility," I told them firmly though gently. "You've already sacrificed so much. Let me handle it." My offer was met with predictable resistance. "We can't accept charity," my father growled, his pride flaring up like a protective shield. "We'll manage on our own." But this time, I refused to back down. "It's not charity," I insisted. "It's family helping family. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" After hours of heated discussion, they finally relented, albeit reluctantly. I paid off the medical bills and set up a trust fund to ensure the relative's family wouldn't face similar hardships in the future. Though my parents grumbled about losing control, I could see relief in their eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes, accepting help isn't a sign of weakness but of strength. As the dust settled, I reflected on how far we had come, and how much further we still had to go. My journey had taught me that success isn't measured solely by wealth or accolades, but by the impact we have on those around us. And while my family may never fully grasp the magnitude of what I've achieved, they were beginning to understand something far more important: that change is possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Yet, as I stood on the cusp of a new chapter, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battles were yet to come. The road ahead promised both triumphs and trials, and I knew that navigating it would require every ounce of courage and resilience I possessed. But I was ready, for them, for myself, and for the future we were slowly building together. As the months turned into years, the transformation within my family became undeniable, though subtle and uneven. My parents still clung to remnants of their old mindset, but cracks had formed in the walls they'd built around themselves. They began attending community workshops I encouraged them to join, sessions on financial literacy, personal growth, and even parenting strategies. At first, they went reluctantly, muttering about how these things are just trends, but over time, their resistance softened. One evening, my mother surprised me by asking for advice on managing her savings. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental, a sign that she was finally willing to take control of her life. Sam and Lily, however, blossomed in ways that made my heart swell with pride. Sam's coding hobby evolved into a passion, and he landed an internship at a tech startup during his senior year of high school. When he called me one night, breathless with excitement after completing his first major project, I could hear the confidence in his voice, the same confidence I had fought so hard to cultivate in myself. Lily, now a teenager, had become an avid writer, penning stories that explored themes of resilience and self-discovery. She shyly handed me one of her notebooks one day, her cheeks flushed with anticipation. As I read her words, I saw glimpses of my own journey reflected back at me: pain, perseverance, and ultimately hope. Despite these victories, there were moments when doubt crept in. My father, in particular, remained a complicated figure in my life. While he occasionally expressed gratitude for my efforts, his ingratitude often resurfaced, especially when things didn't go as planned. Once, after a minor setback in his attempts to start a side business, he snapped at me during dinner. "See? This is why I never bothered before. It's all just a waste of time." His words stung, but instead of reacting defensively, I took a deep breath and replied calmly, "Dad, failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it. You're trying, and that's what matters." To my surprise, he didn't argue. Instead, he stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before nodding slightly and returning to his meal. That small nod carried more weight than any grand declaration ever could. It was an acknowledgement, however reluctant, that I might be right. The turning point came unexpectedly, on a crisp autumn afternoon. I had organized a family trip to the city where I lived, a weekend getaway meant to celebrate how far we'd come together. We visited landmarks, enjoyed meals at restaurants I used to dream about as a child, and even toured the offices of my company. For the first time, I saw genuine awe in my parents' eyes, not envy or resentment, but admiration. On the last day of our trip, as we stood on a rooftop overlooking the skyline, my father broke the silence. "You know," he said slowly, his voice tinged with emotion, "I used to think success was something you were born into. But seeing everything you've built, maybe it's not about luck. Maybe it's about choices." His admission caught me off guard, and for a moment, I struggled to find the right words. Finally, I simply nodded. "It is, Dad. And it's never too late to make new ones." That conversation marked a seismic shift in our relationship. From then on, my father began taking small steps toward change, reaching out to old contacts, exploring new opportunities, and even admitting when he needed help. My mother followed suit, enrolling in art classes and rediscovering a talent she had long neglected. Watching them embrace life with renewed vigor filled me with a sense of fulfillment that no amount of money could buy. But perhaps the most profound realization came not from their transformations, but from my own. In helping them heal, I had also healed parts of myself. The anger and frustration that had once consumed me gave way to understanding and compassion. I realized that breaking free from negativity wasn't just about escaping toxic environments. It was about learning to see the humanity in those who hurt us, recognizing that pain often masquerades as cruelty. When I returned home after that trip, I found myself standing in front of the mirror again, much like the night I had left all those years ago. Only this time, the reflection staring back at me was different. Gone was the uncertainty, replaced by a quiet strength and unwavering belief in the power of resilience. I thought about the $100 bill I had carried with me when I left, a symbol of scarcity and fear. Now, my wealth was measured not in dollars, but in the lives I had touched and the lessons I had learned. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below, I received a text from Sam. It was a photo of him holding a certificate of achievement from his internship. Beneath it, he had written, "Thanks for showing me what's possible." Tears welled up in my eyes as I typed my response, "You did this, kiddo. I'm just proud to have been along for the ride." In that moment, I understood that my journey wasn't just about proving a point to my family, it was about proving a point to myself. Success wasn't a destination, it was a process, a continuous act of becoming. And while my family may never fully grasp the depth of my accomplishments, they had taught me something invaluable, that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate but in the connections we nurture and the impact we leave behind. As I looked out at the horizon, I felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would undoubtedly bring challenges, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced adversity, risen above it, and emerged stronger. More importantly, I had helped others do the same. And in doing so, I had fulfilled the promise I made to myself all those years ago, to create a life defined not by limitations but by limitless possibility. The story doesn't end here because life itself is an ongoing narrative, full of twists and turns, triumphs and trials. But for now, I am content knowing that I have laid the foundation for a future brighter than anything I once dared to imagine. And perhaps in time, my family will learn the lesson I set out to teach them, not through words, but through the example I continue to live every day.